David's heart was pounding so hard he was sure they would hear it from across the room. He pressed himself against the wall next to the doorway, trying to process what he had just witnessed. His mind kept replaying the scene over and over. His father's gentle kiss on Rosa's cheek, the way she had smiled and leaned into him, how natural and comfortable they looked together. This had to be some kind of misunderstanding. Maybe Rosa was just being extra kind because Dad had been feeling lonely lately. Maybe they were looking at old photos of Mom and getting emotional about shared memories. There had to be a simple explanation that didn't involve what David's eyes were telling him. But even as he tried to convince himself, David knew what he had seen. The look in his father's eyes wasn't the look of a man being comforted by a kind employee. It was the look of a man who was genuinely happy, genuinely in love. With Rosa, David felt dizzy. He leaned back against the hallway wall, trying to steady himself. Rosa had been part of their family for 15 years, but she had always been the help. She made breakfast, cleaned the house, did the laundry, and took care of things when his parents traveled. She was reliable, trustworthy, and caring, but she was their employee, wasn't she? From the living room, David could hear his father's voice again, warm and affectionate. "Do you remember when David was 12 and tried to make you that birthday cake? He used salt instead of sugar and nearly burned down the kitchen." Rosa's laughter filled the room. "Oh my goodness, yes! And he was so proud of himself until you took that first bite. Your face went through about 10 different expressions trying not to hurt his feelings." "He meant well," his father said fondly. "He always meant well. Still does, even though he's too busy now to visit his old man." David felt a sharp pang of guilt at those words. Too busy to visit. How long had his father been feeling neglected? How long had he been lonely in this big house while David was off building his empire? "He loves you very much," Rosa said gently. "He calls every week and he always asks me how you're doing when we talk. He worries about you being here alone. I know he does, and I'm proud of everything he's accomplished. But sometimes I wonder if success is worth it if it costs you time with the people you love." David closed his eyes. His father was talking about him like he was a stranger who occasionally checked in out of duty. When had their relationship become so distant? "You're not alone anymore," Rosa said softly, and David heard the sound of rustling paper, probably from the photo album. "We have each other now. We have each other now." The words hit David like a physical blow. This wasn't just friendship or companionship. This was a relationship. A real relationship between his father and the woman who had been taking care of their family for over a decade. David's phone buzzed in his pocket with another email, but he ignored it completely. For once in years, business was the last thing on his mind. He heard his father's voice again. "I never thought I'd feel this way again after Helen died. I thought that part of my life was over." Helen, his mother's name. David rarely heard his father speak about her anymore, except in passing references to "your mother" during their phone calls. "Helen wouldn't want you to be alone forever," Rosa replied. "She loved you too much for that. And she loved this family too much to want it to stop being a family just because she's not here anymore." Do you really think David will understand? When he finds out about us, I mean, us. There it was, out in the open. His father and Rosa were an us now. David felt a mixture of emotions that he couldn't even begin to sort out. Shock, confusion, concern, and something else that felt uncomfortably like betrayal. Not betrayal by his father or Rosa exactly, but betrayal of his mother's memory somehow. "David is a good man," Rosa said. "He might be surprised at first, but he wants you to be happy. I've watched him his whole life, and everything he's ever done has been because he loves his family." David almost laughed despite everything. Rosa was defending him to his own father, saying things about him that he wasn't even sure were true anymore. When was the last time he had done something just because he loved his family, rather than because it was expected or convenient? "I hope you're right," his father said. "I've been thinking about telling him for months, but I wasn't sure how to bring it up. Hello, son, how's business? By the way, I'm in love with Rosa." It doesn't exactly roll off the tongue. More laughter from both of them, and David realized that he had never heard his father joke around like this since his mother died. The man in the living room sounded younger, happier, more alive than the quiet, somewhat sad person David had been talking to on their weekly phone calls. Maybe we could invite him for dinner next time he visits, Rosa suggested. I could make his favorite meal. You know how much he loves my lasagna? And we could tell him together. That's assuming he visits any time soon, his father said, and David heard a note of sadness creep back into his voice. He's so busy these days. I understand, of course. He has responsibilities, people depending on him. But sometimes I miss just talking to him about regular things, not just business and weather reports. David felt tears prick his eyes. His father missed him, missed talking to him, and David had been so wrapped up in his company, in his success, in his important meetings and crucial deals, that he had reduced his relationship with his father to weekly check-in calls that barely lasted 10 minutes. He'll visit soon, Rosa said with certainty. I have a feeling about these things. If only she knew how right she was, David thought. Here he was, standing in the hallway of his childhood home, listening to his father and the family housekeeper talk about their relationship and about him, feeling like an intruder in his own family's life. Rosa, his father said, and his voice became more serious. Are you sure about this, about us? I know this situation is complicated. I'm 20 years older than you, and you've worked for our family for so long. If David doesn't approve, if this causes problems for you... Stop right there, Rosa interrupted firmly. I'm 52 years old and I know my own mind. I've been taking care of other people my whole life, my parents, my children, your family. For the first time in years, someone is taking care of me too. Someone sees me as more than just a person who cooks and cleans. David was startled. Rosa had children? In all the years she had worked for them, he had never asked about her family, her life outside their house. He realized with growing shame that he knew almost nothing about the woman who had been such a constant presence in his life. Your children, his father said. Miguel is finishing his engineering degree next month, isn't he? Yes, thanks to the education fund you and Helen set up for him years ago. And Carmen is doing so well at the hospital. She's going to be head nurse soon. Education fund? David had no idea his parents had helped pay for Rosa's children's education. How many other acts of kindness had they shown over the years that he had never bothered to learn about? They like me, don't they? His father asked, and there was something almost boyish in his uncertainty. They love you, Rosa said warmly. Miguel says you're the grandfather he never had. And Carmen keeps asking when you're going to make an honest woman out of me. David Thompson stared out the window of his private jet as it cut through the evening sky. The meeting that was supposed to keep him in Tokyo for 3 days had been canceled at the last minute. Some kind of emergency with the Japanese partners that needed to be handled internally first. For once, David didn't mind the change in plans. He pulled out his phone and scrolled through the endless emails from his company. Revenue reports, merger proposals, investment opportunities, the usual flood of business that never seemed to stop. At 38, he had built Thompson Technologies from a small software company into a global empire worth over $2 billion. His apps were used by millions of people worldwide, and his cloud computing services powered half the internet. But success came with a price. David couldn't remember the last time he had taken a real break. Even his vacations turned into working trips, with conference calls from beach resorts and strategy meetings in 5-star hotels. His assistant had once joked that he probably dreamed in spreadsheets and profit margins. As the jet began its descent toward Connecticut, David made a decision that surprised even himself. Instead of flying back to his penthouse in Manhattan, he would visit his father. It had been 8 months since his last visit to the family estate. And even that had been brief. Just a quick stop between business trips. The guilt hit him as the plane touched down at the small private airfield. 8 months. His father was 72 years old, living alone in that big house since Mom had passed away 3 years ago. David had hired the best caretakers, made sure all the bills were paid, and called every few weeks. But phone calls weren't the same as being there. His driver was already waiting on the tarmac with the usual black sedan. "Where to, Mr. Thompson?" the man asked, reaching for David's briefcase. "Home," David said, then corrected himself. "I mean to my father's house in Greenwich. And you can head back to the city after you drop me off." "I'll stay the weekend." The driver looked surprised. In 5 years of working for David, weekend trips that didn't involve business were rare. The 40-minute drive gave David time to think. The Connecticut countryside looked beautiful in the fading daylight, with autumn leaves painting the trees in brilliant reds and golds. He had grown up here, running through these same woods, swimming in the lake behind their house, building tree forts with the neighborhood kids. Those seemed like memories from someone else's life now. When had he stopped noticing seasons? When had he stopped taking time to just breathe and look around? His phone buzzed with another email, but for once, David ignored it. The Thompson family estate sat on 15 acres of perfectly manicured grounds. The house itself was a classic colonial style, built by David's great-grandfather in 1923. It had been the family home for 4 generations, filled with memories and traditions that David had been too busy to appreciate in recent years. As they pulled up the circular driveway, David noticed how well-maintained everything looked. The gardens were still perfectly trimmed, the windows sparkled, and the front porch had been recently painted. His father had always taken pride in keeping the place looking its best, even after Mom died. "Should I wait, sir?" the driver asked. "No, thanks. I'll call when I need a ride back to the city." David grabbed his small overnight bag and watched the sedan disappear down the tree-lined driveway. Standing in front of the house where he had grown up, David felt a strange mix of emotions. Nostalgia for his childhood, guilt about staying away so long, and something else, a kind of nervousness about seeing his father. They talked regularly on the phone, but conversations had become routine and brief. "How are you feeling?" "Fine. How's the business?" "Good. How's the weather?" "Can't complain." When had they stopped really talking to each other? David used his key to open the front door quietly. He wanted to surprise his father, maybe catch him reading in his favorite chair in the study like he used to do every evening when David was a kid. Those were some of his best childhood memories. Walking into the study after dinner to find Dad, with a book in his lap and his reading glasses perched on his nose. Maybe we can have one of those conversations tonight, David thought as he stepped into the familiar foyer. Really talk, like we used to. The house smelled the same as always, a mixture of old wood, his mother's favorite lavender candles, and something that just smelled like home. Family photos lined the hallway walls, showing 4 generations of Thompsons in various stages of life. David paused at his high school graduation photo, then moved on to his parents' wedding picture, and finally to one of the whole family from his last Christmas at home. 7 years ago. 7 years. How had so much time slipped away? As he moved deeper into the house, David heard voices coming from the living room. His father's familiar voice, warm and comfortable, mixed with what sounded like a woman's laughter. Probably watching a movie, David thought. Dad had always enjoyed old romantic comedies, especially the ones Mom used to love. But as David got closer, he realized these weren't voices from a television. These were real voices, having a real conversation right there in the living room. That must be Mrs. Peterson from next door, David thought. The elderly neighbor had been friends with his parents for decades and often stopped by to check on his father. That would explain the woman's voice. David smiled, thinking how nice it was that his father had company. He had worried about Dad being lonely in this big house, especially during the long winter evenings. Having good neighbors was a blessing. He approached the living room entrance, planning to say hello and maybe invite Mrs. Peterson to stay for coffee. But as he got closer, something made him pause. The conversation seemed different somehow, more intimate than he would expect between neighbors. The woman's voice was saying something about old photographs, and his father was laughing in a way David hadn't heard in years. It was a young kind of laugh, full of joy and lightness. When was the last time David had heard his father sound so happy? Curiosity got the better of him. Instead of walking straight into the room, David stopped just outside the doorway where he could see in without being noticed. What he saw made him freeze in complete shock. His father was indeed sitting on the familiar old sofa, the same one where the family used to watch movies together when David was young. But he wasn't with Mrs. Peterson. He was with Rosa. Rosa Martinez had worked as the family housekeeper for 15 years. She had been there when David graduated from college, when he started his first company, when his mother got sick, and when she passed away. Rosa had been like a second mother to him growing up. Always there with a warm meal, a listening ear. or a gentle scolding when he needed it. But the Rosa he was looking at now was completely different from the woman he remembered. She wasn't wearing her usual work clothes, the simple blouses and comfortable shoes she always wore while cleaning and cooking. Instead, she was dressed in a beautiful navy blue dress that David had never seen before. Her hair, usually pulled back in a practical ponytail, was styled in soft waves around her face, and she was sitting close to his father, very close. David watched in stunned silence as Rosa reached over and gently adjusted his father's reading glasses, her fingers lingering on his cheek for just a moment. His father smiled at her with an expression David recognized but hadn't seen in years, the same look he used to give Mom when he thought no one was watching. They were looking through what appeared to be old photo albums. Their heads bent together as they pointed at pictures and shared quiet comments. Rosa said something that made his father chuckle, and David saw him reach over and squeeze her hand affectionately. Then, as David continued to stare in disbelief, his father leaned over and gently kissed Rosa on the cheek. It wasn't a casual peck between friends. It was tender, loving, intimate, the kind of kiss shared between two people who cared deeply for each other. Rosa smiled and rested her head against his father's shoulder for a moment, looking completely comfortable and natural in his embrace. David's mind went completely blank. This couldn't be happening. This was Rosa, their housekeeper, their employee. She was, actually, David realized with a shock, he didn't really know much about Rosa's personal life at all. In 15 years, he had never asked about her dreams, her hopes, her own family situation. She had always just been there, part of the background of his life, taking care of the house and the family without David ever thinking of her as a complete person with her own needs and desires. But watching her now, seeing the gentle way she interacted with his father and the obvious affection between them, David began to understand that he had been blind to something that had apparently been developing right in front of his eyes. His father looked happier than David had seen him since before Mom's illness. His face was relaxed, his smile genuine, and there was a lightness about him that had been missing for years. Even his posture seemed different, less tired, more engaged with life. And Rosa, she looked radiant. The weariness that David now realized had always been in her eyes was gone, replaced by something that could only be described as joy. They fit together naturally, comfortably, like two people who had found something precious and unexpected in each other. David stood frozen in the doorway, trying to process what he was seeing. Part of him wanted to back away quietly and pretend he had never witnessed this scene. Another part wanted to march into the room and demand an explanation. But mostly, he just felt confused and completely unprepared for a situation he had never imagined possible. His father and Rosa, together, as more than employer and employee, as... what exactly? As David continued to watch, trying to make sense of what he was seeing, he realized that his unexpected return home was about to change everything, not just for him, but for all three of them. Nothing would ever be quite the same again. Both of them laughed at that, and David heard the sound of pages turning in the photo album again. "Look at this one," Rosa said. "David's college graduation. You were so proud that day you must have taken 100 pictures." I was proud. Still am. But I wish I had known then what I know now about balancing success and family. Maybe I could have taught him better. You taught him plenty, Rosa said loyally. You taught him to be honest, to work hard, to care about other people. The rest he'll figure out on his own. David felt like his legs might give out. Here was Rosa, defending him again, seeing good in him that he wasn't sure he deserved. And his father, taking responsibility for David's workaholism instead of blaming him for staying away so long. They continued talking, sharing memories and making quiet plans for the future. David learned that they had been spending evenings together like this for months, that Rosa no longer went home to her small apartment every night, but stayed in the guest room down the hall. He learned that she had been the one to convince his father to start taking his heart medication regularly again, and that his father had been the one to encourage her to finally take the citizenship test she had been putting off for years. They had become a team, a partnership, two people who genuinely cared for each other and were building a life together. And David had been completely oblivious to all of it. As he stood in the hallway, listening to their conversation and trying to absorb this new reality, David realized that he was facing a choice. He could quietly slip back outside, get in a taxi, and pretend this had never happened. He could continue his old pattern of brief visits and distant phone calls, letting his father and Rosa live their lives without interference. Or he could walk into that room right now and confront this situation head-on. But as he stood there, frozen with indecision, his father's voice carried clearly from the living room. "I think I hear someone at the front door. Are we expecting anyone?" David's heart stopped. In all his shock and confusion, he had forgotten that he was standing in an old house with creaky floors and that his father had always had excellent hearing. "I don't think so," Rosa replied, but David could hear movement from the living room, the sound of the photo album being closed, footsteps approaching the doorway where he stood. There was no more time for decisions. In about 5 seconds, his father was going to walk into this hallway and find him standing there like some kind of spy. David took a deep breath, stepped away from the wall, and prepared to face whatever came next. Ready or not, the conversation he had been avoiding for 8 months was about to happen right now. David's mind went blank for a split second. He could hear his father's footsteps getting closer to the doorway where he stood frozen like a deer in headlights. There was nowhere to hide, nowhere to run, and no way to pretend he hadn't been standing there listening to their private conversation. So he did the only thing he could think of. He cleared his throat loudly and called out, "Dad!" "It's me, David." The footsteps stopped immediately. There was a moment of complete silence that felt like it lasted forever. Then his father's voice, filled with surprise and something that sounded like panic. "David? How did you—" "We weren't expecting you." David stepped forward into the doorway, trying to look as normal as possible even though his heart was beating so fast he felt dizzy. His father stood in the middle of the living room looking completely stunned. Behind him, Rosa had quickly moved to the far end of the sofa and was frantically straightening the scattered photo albums on the coffee table. "Hi, Dad." David's voice came out steadier than he felt. "My meeting in Tokyo got canceled at the last minute, so I thought I'd surprise you with a visit." His father ran a hand through his gray hair, a nervous habit David remembered from childhood. That's wonderful, son. Really wonderful. I just wish I'd known you were coming. We could have prepared something special for dinner." Rosa had finished organizing the photos and stood up, smoothing down her navy dress. David noticed that she couldn't quite meet his eyes. "Mr. David, welcome home. I should go start preparing something for you to eat. You must be hungry after your flight." She moved toward the doorway where David stood, clearly intending to escape to the kitchen, but David gently blocked her path. "Please don't go, Rosa. I think we need to talk. All 3 of us." The words hung in the air like a challenge. Rosa's face went pale, and his father looked like he might be sick. "David," his father started. "I know this might look— It looks like you 2 care about each other very much," David interrupted. "And it looks like I've been blind to what's been happening in my own family." Rosa finally looked up at him, and David was surprised to see tears in her eyes. "Mr. David, I want you to know that I never meant for this to happen. Your father was so sad after your mother passed, and we would talk sometimes about grief and loss. And somehow you fell in love," David finished quietly. The simple words seemed to echo in the room. Nobody moved for a long moment. Then his father stepped forward, and David saw a flash of the strong, determined man who had raised him. "Yes, we did. Rosa and I fell in love. I know it might be hard for you to understand, but—" "Dad, sit down," David said. "Both of you, please sit down. We're going to talk about this properly." They sat on opposite ends of the sofa, leaving space between them like they were afraid to be too close in front of David. He pulled up the old armchair that had been his mother's favorite and positioned it so he could see both of them clearly. "How long?" he asked simply. His father and Rosa exchanged glances. "About 8 months, his father admitted. "But we've been close friends for much longer. After your mother died, Rosa was the only person who really understood what I was going through." "My husband died 5 years ago," Rosa added quietly. "Cancer like your mother. When your father was struggling with his grief, I knew exactly how he felt. We started talking more, sharing stories about our spouses, about what it felt like to be alone. David felt another stab of guilt. He hadn't even known Rosa had been married, let alone that she was a widow dealing with her own loss. "When did it become more than friendship?" he asked. His father looked down at his hands. "It happened gradually. Rosa would stay later in the evenings to keep me company. We'd have dinner together, watch old movies, talk about books. One night about 8 months ago, she found me looking through old photos of your mother and crying. She sat with me and held my hand while I cried. And I realized that I hadn't just lost my wife. I'd lost my best friend, my partner, the person I shared everything with. And I realized," Rosa continued softly, "that I had found someone who understood that kind of loss. Someone who didn't expect me to get over it or move on, but who knew that you carry that love with you forever while still being open to new love." David leaned back in the chair, processing their words. "So this isn't some rebound thing or a convenience relationship. You're saying you actually love each other?" "Yes," his father said firmly. "I love Rosa. I love her kindness, her strength, her wisdom, her laugh. I love the way she takes care of everyone around her but still manages to challenge me when I'm being stubborn. I love that she makes this house feel like a home again, instead of just a place where I'm waiting around to die." David's throat tightened at his father's words. "Is that how you felt? Like you were waiting around to die?" "Sometimes," his father admitted. "The house felt so empty after your mother passed. And with you so busy with your company, I went days sometimes without having a real conversation with another person. Rosa changed that." Rosa reached over and took his father's hand, and David noticed that neither of them seemed embarrassed about it anymore. "Your father changed my life too," she said. "For 15 years, I've been the woman who takes care of other people's houses, other people's families. I loved working for your family, don't misunderstand me. But I was always on the outside looking in, never quite belonging anywhere." "But you do belong here," David said, surprising himself with the certainty in his voice. "You've always belonged here. I just never thought about it that way." Rosa's eyes filled with tears again. "Thank you for saying that. It means more than you know." David was quiet for a moment, thinking about everything they had told him. Then he asked the question that had been bothering him the most. "What about Mom? How do you both feel about this relationship in terms of her memory?" His father's face grew serious. "I was worried about that at first. I felt guilty, like I was betraying Helen's memory or forgetting her somehow. But Rosa helped me understand that Helen would want me to be happy. She wouldn't want me to spend the rest of my life alone and sad. Your mother was a wise woman," Rosa said. "She knew that love doesn't diminish when it's shared. She loved your father enough to want him to find happiness again. And she loved me enough to trust me with her family's care all these years." David felt a memory surface. His mother near the end, weak from chemotherapy but still trying to take care of everyone around her. She had called him aside one day and made him promise to look after his father, to make sure he didn't become isolated and bitter. "She made me promise to take care of Dad," David said slowly. "But I didn't do a very good job of it, did I?" "You did what you could," his father said gently. "You have responsibilities, a business to run." "I understood that. But understanding isn't the same as being happy about it," David replied. "I heard what you said earlier about missing talking to me about regular things instead of just business updates." His father looked surprised. "How much did you hear?" "Enough to realize that I've been a pretty terrible son for the past few years." David's voice was heavy with regret. "I turned our relationship into a weekly status report instead of actually being present in your life." "You're here now," Rosa said kindly. "That's what matters." David looked at both of them, really looked at them, and saw something he had missed before. They weren't just two lonely people who had found comfort in each other. They were genuinely happy together. His father looked more relaxed and alive than David had seen him in years, and Rosa had a glow about her that had nothing to do with her pretty dress and everything to do with being truly loved. "I have to ask," David said carefully, "and please don't take this the wrong way, but I need to know that this relationship is really equal. Dad, you're not taking advantage of Rosa's position in the family, and Rosa, you're not staying in this relationship because you feel obligated or because you're worried about your job." His father stiffened slightly. "David, I would never—" Let him ask, Rosa interrupted. It's a fair question. She turned to David with dignity. Your father has never made me feel like I had to do anything I didn't want to do. When our friendship started becoming something more, he was the one who worried about the situation being complicated because I worked for your family. He offered to help me find another job if I felt uncomfortable. And I told her that was ridiculous, his father added. Rosa has been part of this family for 15 years. Her job was never in question, relationship or no relationship. But I don't work for your family anymore, Rosa said quietly. Not in the same way. Your father and I are partners now, in every sense of the word. I still take care of the house because I love this place and I want to, not because it's my job. David nodded slowly. What about your children? How do they feel about this? Rosa smiled for the first time since he had walked into the room. Miguel and Carmen love your father. They've known him their whole lives, because I used to bring them here sometimes when they were little and I had to work weekends. Your parents helped pay for their education, did you know that? David shook his head. I didn't know that. Your mother set up college funds for both of them when Miguel was 10 and Carmen was 8. She said every child deserved a chance at education regardless of their circumstances. Another thing about his parents' generosity that David had never known about. How many other acts of kindness had they performed over the years, while he was too focused on his own life to notice? Miguel graduated with his engineering degree last month, Rosa continued proudly. And Carmen just got promoted to head nurse at the county hospital. They both call your father Grandpa now. They're good kids, his father added. Smart, hardworking, kind. They get that from their mother. David watched the way his father looked at Rosa when he said that, with genuine pride and affection. This wasn't an old man trying to recapture his youth or a lonely person settling for companionship. This was real love between two people who had found each other at a time in their lives when they hadn't expected to find love again. I owe you both an apology, David said finally. I've been so wrapped up in my own life that I completely missed what was happening with the two people who matter most to me. I should have been here more. I should have paid attention. I should have asked better questions and listened better to the answers. You're here now, his father repeated. And you're listening now. That's what counts. But David wasn't finished. I also owe you an apology for my initial reaction. When I first saw you two together, my first thought wasn't, I'm glad Dad is happy. It was more like, this is weird and complicated and I don't know how to handle it. I'm ashamed of that. It's understandable, Rosa said gently. This is a big change and change is always hard. No, it's not understandable, David said firmly. You've both been part of my life for years. You've both sacrificed and given and loved without asking for anything in return. If you've found happiness together, then I should be celebrating, not questioning it. The room fell quiet again, but this time the silence felt different, less tense, more hopeful. Finally, David stood up and walked over to the sofa. He sat down between his father and Rosa, taking both of their hands in his. I love you, Dad, and I love you too, Rosa. You've been like a mother to me since I was a kid. If you two love each other and you're happy together, then I'm happy for you. I'm sorry it took me this long to say that. Both of them were crying now, and David felt tears on his own cheeks too. I want to be part of this family properly, he continued. Not just the son who calls once a week and sends expensive gifts on holidays. I want to know what's going on in your lives. I want to have dinner together and talk about books and movies and regular things. I want to meet Miguel and Carmen properly. I want to be here for you both. His father squeezed his hand tightly. We want that too, son. More than you know. And for the first time in years, David felt like he was truly home. The next morning, David woke up in his old childhood bedroom, feeling like he had lived through someone else's dream. Sunlight was streaming through the familiar blue curtains, and he could smell coffee brewing downstairs along with what seemed like bacon and eggs. For a moment, everything felt normal and peaceful. Then the memories of the previous evening came flooding back. His father and Rosa, together, in love. The long conversation that had ended with tears, hugs, and promises to be a better family to each other. David sat up in bed and rubbed his eyes. In the bright light of morning, was he really okay with everything he had learned? Last night, caught up in the emotion of the moment, it had seemed clear that his father deserved happiness. But now, alone with his thoughts, David found his mind spinning with questions and doubts he hadn't expected. He got dressed and headed downstairs, following the smell of breakfast and the sound of quiet conversation from the kitchen. As he approached the doorway, he could see his father sitting at the breakfast table reading a newspaper while Rosa moved around the kitchen, cooking and humming softly to herself. It was such a domestic scene, so normal and comfortable that David paused again. This wasn't the formal relationship between an employer and housekeeper that he remembered from his childhood. This was two people sharing a morning routine, taking care of each other in small, everyday ways. "Good morning," David said as he entered the kitchen. Both his father and Rosa looked up and smiled at him, but David noticed there was still some nervousness in their expressions, like they weren't quite sure where they all stood after last night's revelations. "Good morning, sweetheart," Rosa said, and then immediately looked flustered. "I mean, Mr. David, I'm sorry, Rosa," David said gently, "you've been calling me sweetheart since I was 12 years old. Don't stop now," she smiled with relief. "Old habits. Good ones, I hope." His father folded his newspaper and gestured to the empty chair across from him. "Sit down, son. Rosa made your favorite breakfast. Blueberry pancakes, crispy bacon, and scrambled eggs with cheese." David sat down and accepted the plate Rosa handed him. The pancakes were perfectly golden, just like he remembered from weekend mornings when he was a kid. "You remembered exactly how I liked them." "Of course I remembered," Rosa said, pouring him a cup of coffee. "I've been making your breakfast for 15 years. As they ate together, David found himself studying his father and Rosa, trying to see their relationship with fresh eyes. His father buttered Rosa's toast without being asked, and she refilled his coffee cup before he had to ask. They moved around each other in the kitchen like they had been doing this dance for years. "How long have you been having breakfast together like this?" David asked. His father and Rosa exchanged glances. "About 6 months," his father admitted. "Rosa started joining me for breakfast after our relationship changed. It seemed silly for her to eat alone in the kitchen while I ate alone in the dining room." "The dining room always felt too formal anyway," Rosa added. "Too big and empty. This feels more like a real family breakfast." Family. There was that word again. David was still trying to figure out what it meant now that the family had expanded in a way he never expected. After breakfast, David decided to take a walk around the property. He needed time to think, to process everything without his father and Rosa watching his every reaction. The autumn morning was crisp and beautiful, with leaves crunching under his feet as he followed the familiar paths through the woods behind the house. This was where he used to come as a teenager when he needed to think through problems or escape from the pressure of school and his parents' expectations. The trees were the same, the paths unchanged, but everything else in his world had shifted overnight. As he walked, David found himself thinking about his mother. What would she think about his father's relationship with Rosa? Would she approve, or would she feel betrayed? He remembered his mother as a generous woman who always saw the best in people. She had been the one to hire Rosa 15 years ago, despite his father's initial concerns about hiring someone so young who didn't have extensive experience with large houses. "She has kind eyes," his mother had said after Rosa's interview, "and she needs this job to take care of her children. Besides, I think she'll become part of our family, not just our employee." How had his mother known? Had she somehow sensed that Rosa would become so much more than a housekeeper to their family? David also thought about the education fund his parents had set up for Rosa's children. His mother had never mentioned it to him, but that was typical of her quiet generosity. She had always believed that good deeds should be done without fanfare or recognition. Would that same woman who had helped pay for Miguel and Carmen's college really object to Rosa finding love and happiness with her widowed husband? Or would she be glad that two people she cared about had found comfort in each other? When David returned to the house an hour later, he found his father in his study, reading in his favorite leather chair. It was exactly where David had expected to find him the night before, and for a moment, everything felt normal and familiar. "Dad, can we talk?" David asked from the doorway. "Of course. Come in, sit down." His father marked his place in his book and gave David his full attention. "You look like you have something on your mind." David settled into the chair across from his father's desk, the same chair where he used to sit as a child when they talked about homework or problems at school. "I want to be supportive of your relationship with Rosa," David began carefully. "But I'm having some thoughts and feelings that I'm not proud of, and I think I need to be honest about them." His father nodded. "I appreciate your honesty. What's troubling you?" "Part of me keeps thinking about Mom," David admitted. "I know it's been 3 years since she died, and I know she'd want you to be happy. But seeing you with someone else still feels strange, like I'm somehow being disloyal to her memory by accepting this." His father was quiet for a long moment. "I understand that feeling," he said finally. "I struggled with the same thing for months. Every time I started to have feelings for Rosa, I felt guilty, like I was cheating on your mother somehow." "How did you work through it?" "Rosa helped me," his father said. "She reminded me that your mother and I had talked about this possibility before she died. Your mother actually made me promise that if something happened to her, I wouldn't spend the rest of my life alone." 3 weeks later, David found himself sitting in his corporate office on the 42nd floor of a Manhattan skyscraper, staring out at the city below, but thinking about home. For the first time in years, when he thought the word home, he didn't picture his expensive penthouse apartment or even his childhood bedroom. He pictured his father and Rosa sitting together in the living room, sharing stories and laughter. His assistant knocked on the door and peeked in. "Mr. Thompson, your 3 o'clock meeting is here." David glanced at his watch and realized he had been daydreaming for 20 minutes. "Actually, cancel the rest of my meetings for today. I need to head out, sir. But you have the quarterly review with the board at 4 and the merger discussion at 5. Reschedule them for next week." David was already reaching for his jacket. "There's somewhere I need to be." An hour later, David was driving his car up the familiar tree-lined driveway to his father's house. He had been making this trip every weekend for the past 3 weeks, something that had shocked his business partners and delighted his father and Rosa. Today was special, though. Today he was bringing someone with him. "Are you nervous?" asked the woman sitting in the passenger seat beside him. "A little," David admitted. "I just want them to like you." Lisa Chen laughed. "David, you've been telling them about me for weeks. Besides, from everything you've said, they sound like the most welcoming people in the world." David smiled. Lisa was a pediatric nurse he had met at a charity fundraiser 2 weeks ago. She was kind, funny, down to earth, and completely unimpressed by his wealth or business success. She cared more about the fact that he was trying to be a better son and family member than she did about his company's stock price. "They are welcoming," David said. "But this is the first time I've brought anyone home to meet them since I was in college." As they pulled up to the house, David could see his father and Rosa working together in the front garden. They were planting bulbs for spring flowers, and Rosa was laughing at something his father had said. They looked like any other happy couple enjoying a Saturday afternoon together. David felt a warmth in his chest that he was still getting used to. Pure happiness for the people he loved, without any of the complicated emotions that had confused him a month ago. "Dad!" "Rosa!" David called out as he and Lisa approached the garden. Both of them looked up and waved, their faces lighting up with genuine joy at seeing David. This was another thing that had changed. They no longer looked surprised when he showed up. They had come to expect and count on his regular visits. "David!" Rosa wiped her hands on her gardening gloves and hurried over to hug him. "And you must be Lisa. We've heard so much about you." Lisa smiled warmly. "All good things, I hope." "Only the best," his father said, joining them and shaking Lisa's hand. "David tells us you work with children at the hospital." "I do. Pediatric cancer ward. It's challenging work, but incredibly rewarding." Rosa's eyes lit up. "My daughter Carmen is a nurse, too. She works with elderly patients, but she's always said she admires the pediatric nurses most of all. It takes a special kind of strength to work with sick children." As they walked toward the house together, David watched Lisa chatting easily with his father and Rosa. She asked thoughtful questions about their garden, complimented Rosa on her beautiful dress, and seemed genuinely interested in everything they had to say. "Lisa, would you like to see the house?" Rosa offered. "David grew up here," So there are plenty of embarrassing childhood photos if you're interested. I would love that, Lisa laughed, glancing at David with mischief in her eyes. As Rosa led Lisa inside, his father fell into step beside David. I like her, he said quietly. She's real. No pretense, no games. Just a genuine person who seems to care about you for the right reasons. She does, David said. And she's excited to meet Miguel and Carmen next weekend. They'll love her. Carmen especially. She's always happy to meet another nurse. They had reached the front porch when David's phone rang. He glanced at it and saw his assistant's number. I should take this, he said apologetically. It'll just be a minute. But as he answered the phone and heard about some crisis that supposedly needed his immediate attention, David realized something important. The old version of himself would have jumped in his car and raced back to the office. Putting business ahead of family time once again, the new version of David had a different priority. Handle it however you think is best, he told his assistant. I trust your judgment. I'll review your decision on Monday morning. He hung up and found his father staring at him in amazement. You just told your assistant to handle a crisis without you? His father asked. I did. And you know what? The company will survive just fine. These emergencies are never as urgent as they seem in the moment. His father smiled and put his arm around David's shoulder. Your mother would be so proud of the man you've become. I hope so. I'm still learning how to balance everything, but I'm trying. They walked inside and found Lisa and Rosa in the kitchen, working together to prepare lunch. Lisa was chopping vegetables while Rosa seasoned chicken, and they were chatting like old friends. David, Lisa called out, Rosa is teaching me how to make your favorite marinade. Apparently, you've been requesting this chicken dish since you were 10 years old. It was the first thing I learned to cook when I came to this country, Rosa explained. David's mother asked me to teach her the recipe, but she could never get it quite right. David always said mine tasted better. That's because you cook with love, David said, giving Rosa a quick hug. Mom was many things, but she was never much of a cook. They spent the afternoon like a normal family. They ate lunch together on the back patio, sharing stories and getting to know each other better. Lisa fit in perfectly, asking about family history, laughing at David's father's jokes, and helping Rosa clear the dishes without being asked. After lunch, David's father suggested they take a walk around the property. As they strolled through the woods where David used to play as a child, he found himself walking beside Rosa while his father and Lisa walked ahead. Deep in conversation about books they had both read. Rosa, David said quietly, I want to apologize for how long it took me to really see you. Not as our housekeeper, but as a person with your own life and dreams and feelings. Rosa looked at him with gentle eyes. Oh, sweetheart, you don't need to apologize for that. You were young when I first came here, and then you were busy building your life. It's natural that you saw me in the role I was hired for, but it wasn't fair to you, and I want you to know that I see you now. I see how much you love my father, how much you've sacrificed for your children, how strong and wise and generous you are. You're not just my father's partner, you're my family. Tears filled Rosa's eyes. That means everything to me, David. Everything. I also want you to know that I'm going to do better. I'm not going to be the son who only shows up for holidays and emergencies. I want to be present for the good times, too. You already are, Rosa said, squeezing his arm. These past few weeks, seeing you here every weekend, seeing how much effort you're putting into being part of our lives, it's made your father so happy. He lights up every time you call, and he spends half the week planning things he wants to show you or talk to you about. David felt his throat tighten with emotion. I wasted so many years being too busy for what really mattered. You didn't waste them, Rosa said firmly. You were building something important, creating jobs for people, making a difference in the world. Your parents were always proud of your success, but now you're learning that success doesn't mean much if you don't have people to share it with. As they rejoined his father and Lisa near the lake behind the house, David realized that Rosa was right. His business success felt hollow compared to the warmth of family dinners and lazy weekend afternoons spent talking and laughing with people who loved him. Dad, David said as they settled on the old wooden bench that overlooked the water, I've been thinking about something. What's that? I want to step back from the day-to-day operations of the company. Promote some of my vice presidents, hire a president to handle the routine decisions. I built this business, but I don't need to micromanage every detail of it. His father looked surprised. Are you sure? You've worked so hard to build Thompson Technologies. And it's successful enough now to run without me hovering over every decision. I want to focus on the big picture, strategy, vision, major partnerships. But I also want to have a life outside of work. I want to be here for family dinners and birthdays and regular Tuesday evenings when nothing special is happening. Lisa took his hand. I think that sounds wonderful. I do too, his father agreed. But what made you decide this? David looked around at the three people sitting with him by the lake. His father, the woman his father loved, and the woman he was falling in love with himself. I realized that at the end of my life, I'm not going to be remembering quarterly profit reports or successful mergers. I'm going to be remembering moments like this, as the sun began to set over the lake, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and purples. David's father stood up and cleared his throat. I have an announcement to make, he said. Looking slightly nervous, David, Rosa, and Lisa all turned to look at him expectantly. Rosa and I have been talking, and we've decided... He paused and took Rosa's hand. We've decided to get married. For a moment, everyone was quiet. Then David jumped up and grabbed both of them in a huge hug. That's incredible, he said, genuinely thrilled. When? Where? What can I do to help? Rosa was crying happy tears. We were hoping for a small ceremony here at the house. Maybe in the spring when the garden is in bloom? I'll handle everything, David said immediately. Flowers, catering, music, whatever you need. Actually, his father said with a smile, we were hoping you'd do something else for us. Anything. Would you walk me down the aisle? I know it's usually the father who walks the bride, but Rosa's father passed away years ago, and you're the most important person in my life besides Rosa herself. David felt tears in his own eyes now. Dad, I would be honored. Lisa was crying too, and even though she had just met this family a few hours ago, she was clearly moved by the love and acceptance she was witnessing. As they sat together watching the sunset, David realized that his life had completely changed in the span of a month. He had gone from being a successful but lonely businessman who treated his family like an obligation to being part of a loving, complicated, beautiful family that was about to grow even larger. 6 months later, on a perfect spring morning with cherry blossoms blooming throughout the garden, David walked his father down the makeshift aisle that had been set up on the back lawn. Rosa looked radiant in a simple ivory dress, with Miguel and Carmen standing beside her as her witnesses. Lisa sat in the front row next to David's business partner and his wife, along with neighbors and friends who had come to celebrate the union. Even some of David's father's old colleagues from the university were there, proving that true friends didn't judge love based on social conventions. As David watched his father and Rosa exchange vows they had written themselves, promising to love and care for each other for whatever time they had left, he felt overwhelmed with gratitude. Gratitude for a canceled business meeting that had brought him home at exactly the right moment. Gratitude for parents who had taught him that love could bloom in unexpected places. Gratitude for Rosa, who had taught him that family wasn't just about blood relations, but about people who chose to love and support each other. Most of all, he felt grateful for second chances. His father's second chance at love, Rosa's second chance at happiness, and his own second chance at being the kind of son and family member he should have been all along. After the ceremony, as guests mingled and celebrated on the lawn where David had played as a child, he found himself standing with Lisa under the old oak tree where he used to build tree forts. "What are you thinking about?" Lisa asked. "I'm thinking about how wrong I was about almost everything a year ago," David said. "I thought success meant working 18-hour days and accumulating wealth. I thought family was something you maintained with occasional phone calls and expensive gifts. I thought I knew what mattered. And now?" David looked out at the celebration, at his father dancing with his new wife, at Miguel and Carmen laughing with neighbors, at all the people who had become his extended family. "Now I know that the richest man in the world isn't the one with the most money. It's the one with the most love in his life." Lisa smiled and kissed him softly. "I couldn't agree more." As the afternoon turned to evening and the celebration continued around them, David realized that he had finally learned the most important lesson of his life. Success wasn't about building an empire or accumulating wealth. It was about building relationships, creating a family, and being present for the people who mattered most. And for the first time in his adult life, David Thompson felt truly, completely successful. David felt a jolt of surprise. She did. She was very clear about it. She said she loved me too much to want me to be lonely for the next 20 or 30 years. She made me promise to find someone to share my life with, someone who would take care of me the way I had taken care of her. David's throat felt tight. She really said that? She did. And she specifically mentioned Rosa. What do you mean? His father smiled sadly. Your mother said if something happens to me, pay attention to Rosa. She's a good woman who understands what it means to love a family. She'll take care of you if you let her. David stared at his father in shock. Mom knew this might happen? I think your mother was wiser than either of us realized. She saw how much Rosa cared about our family, and she saw that Rosa was dealing with her own grief and loneliness. Your mother believed that sometimes the people we need most are right in front of us, even when we don't see them at first. David felt tears building in his eyes. So Mom would actually approve of this relationship? I believe she would. More than that, I think she hoped for it. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, both lost in memories of the woman who had been such a central part of their lives. There's something else bothering me, David said eventually. And this one is harder to admit. Tell me. David took a deep breath. Part of me has been thinking about the class differences between you and Rosa. You're a retired college professor from an old family, and she's an immigrant who worked as a housekeeper. I hate that I'm even thinking this way, but I can't seem to stop myself. His father's expression grew serious. I'm glad you're honest enough to admit those thoughts instead of pretending they don't exist. I don't want to think this way, David continued. Rosa is amazing. She's kind, intelligent, hardworking, and she's been like a mother to me. But society has taught me to think in terms of social classes and appropriate matches, and I'm struggling to overcome that conditioning. Do you know Rosa's story? His father asked. Her real story, not just the basic facts about her working for our family. David shook his head. I realized yesterday that I know almost nothing about her personal life. Rosa came to this country 25 years ago with 2 small children and almost no money. Her husband had died in an accident, and she was trying to build a life for her family in a place where she didn't speak the language well and had no connections. David listened intently as his father continued. She worked 3 jobs for the first 5 years she was here. She cleaned offices at night, worked at a grocery store during the day, and took care of elderly people on weekends. She saved every penny she could so her children could have better opportunities than she had. I had no idea, David said quietly. When your mother hired her, Rosa was finally able to quit her other jobs and focus on one position that paid well enough to support her family. But even then, she took night classes to improve her English and later to learn basic accounting so she could help us manage the household budget. David felt ashamed of his earlier thoughts about class differences. Rosa has a bachelor's degree from a university in El Salvador, his father continued. She was a teacher there before her husband died. She gave up her career, left everything she knew, and started over in a foreign country because she wanted her children to have opportunities they couldn't get at home. She's incredible, David said, meaning it completely. She is. And her children are proof of her success as a mother. Miguel is going to be an engineer, and Carmen is already making a difference as a nurse. Rosa sacrificed everything to give them those opportunities. David felt a deep sense of shame about his earlier prejudices. I've been thinking about this all wrong, haven't I? You've been thinking the way society taught you to think, his father said kindly. But real worth isn't measured by someone's job title or their family's social standing. It's measured by their character, their kindness, their strength in the face of adversity. Rosa has all of those qualities. She does, and she makes me want to be a better person. She makes me laugh. She challenges my opinions. She takes care of me when I'm sick, and she listens to my stories even when I've told them a dozen times before. David could hear the love in his father's voice, and for the first time, he felt genuinely happy about the relationship instead of conflicted about it. "There's one more thing," David said. "I'm worried about what other people will think. Our friends, the neighbors, people at your club, some of them might not understand or approve." His father was quiet for a moment. "I've thought about that too," he admitted. "And I've decided that I'm too old to live my life based on other people's approval. Rosa and I are happy together. We're not hurting anyone. If some people can't accept that, then they weren't really friends worth keeping anyway." David nodded slowly. His father was right. What mattered was not what strangers or casual acquaintances thought, but what made the people he loved happy and fulfilled. "I want to get to know Rosa better," David said. "Not as our housekeeper, but as the woman my father loves and as a person in her own right. I want to meet Miguel and Carmen. I want to be part of this new version of our family." His father smiled. "That would mean the world to both of us." "And Dad, I want to be here more often. Not just for special occasions or emergencies, but regularly. I want to have family dinners and talk about books and movies. I want to be present in your life, not just checking in from a distance. I'd love that more than you know." David stood up and hugged his father tightly. "I'm sorry it took me so long to figure out what really matters." "You figured it out when it counted," his father replied. "That's all that matters now."